Hi everyone, so today we are learning how to do different operations with complex numbers. And remember, when we talk about operations, we're talking about the four main things we do in math. So we divide, we multiply, we add, and we subtract. So those are the four main operations that we concentrate on. So we've done this very often. We did this when we learned earlier in the year, so now it's coming back, okay? So now we are just learning it with complex numbers. And when we are completing these problems and these different examples, we really want to focus on combining like terms, okay? That's our big focus today. And when we are looking at different complex numbers, we know that one of the real part is going to be a real number, a real whole number, while the imaginary part is going to be a number that has an I next to it, because I is an imaginary number. So when we think of I, we want to think of I as a variable, okay? Just think of it as any other variable like X. So in your head, just know that it's a variable, okay? So when we're looking at adding, that's the first thing we're going to do is add and subtract complex numbers, because those are our basic operations, right? We learn how to add and subtract first, okay? So when we are adding and subtracting, we're just going to look at these first. For example, 1, okay? We are going to look at our two different complex numbers, okay? We have 7 plus 7, 1, which is 7i, is a complex number, and then -6 minus 18i, which is a complex number. So remember, when we started to FOIL and we started to look at different things, we learned that when we have addition, so when we have two terms and we're adding them, we can just drop everything out of the parentheses. So here I would have 7 plus 7i, make that a better I, minus 6 minus 18i, because everything is just going to drop out with the exact signs that we had, okay? And now I told you guys to remember that when we are adding, all we're doing is combining like terms, okay? And that's important here. What I want you to remember is always think that the I is an X. Okay, so when we say there was an X there, we would be able to combine those like terms. So we can combine the two terms that have an I. But then we also can't forget to combine the two terms that are just real numbers. Okay, and the only thing after that is we're combining like terms. So we are combining 7 minus 6, which gives me 1. And we are combining positive 7i minus 18i, which gives me a negative 11i. And this becomes my answer, okay? So it's something that's very simple. You're really just combining like terms, okay? So when we're looking at example 2, okay, this is a little more difficult because we have some radicals, we have some i's. So the first step is always, when it's addition, is to just drop everything down, okay? So I'm dropping everything down, and I'm keeping the signs that came with it, whatever sign is in front, okay? So now what I need to do is I need to go ahead and combine like terms. Now, the immediate like terms that I see are 6 and positive 2, okay? So those are like terms, just normal numbers, right, with nothing attached to it. So 6 plus 2 is 8, okay? Now, any term that has an I in it becomes like terms. So these two terms as negative 12i square root of 2 and 5i square root of 2, because they have the same radicals, we can combine them, right? They're both the square root of 2. So what we're going to do is we are going to take negative 12i square root of 2 and add 5i square root of 2 to that to get a negative 7i square root of 2. Okay, so very simple. You're just combining like terms, okay, when we're adding. Drop everything out of the parentheses and just combine like terms, okay? So when we add, drop, and combine, okay? Now, with subtraction, we have a little something different. So you guys are going to have to go back in your memory a little bit and remember what we do when we have a negative sign, okay, when we're subtracting two numbers, right? what we need to do is we need to make sure we are changing the signs of the second number, okay? Or if you see it the other way, you can distribute the negative, okay? So I'm gonna do it like we were to change the signs of the second number, okay? So my first parenthesis is going to stay the same, okay? Then I am changing the signs of my second parenthesis when I see that negative, or I'm distributing. So this 4 is going to become a -4 because negative times 4 is -4. And this -6i is going to become a +6i because a negative times a negative is a positive. I see it better by just changing the signs of the second parenthesis. Okay, so I'm just flipping the signs. So my +4 becomes a negative, and my -6i becomes a positive. All right, so now I can go ahead and combine like terms. So my obvious like terms are here and here. Okay, those are just my normal numbers. And 8 minus 4 is 7. And then I have I plus 6i. And remember, we could always remember that there's a 1 in front of our I because just like x, there's always a 1 in front of our x. So 1i plus 6i becomes 7i. And that is my end answer. Okay? So remember, so when we subtract, we flip and then combine. Okay? So now those are the two easier operations, okay? So now we are going to come to multiplying and dividing because that's what, in math, that's what we learn next, okay? So now we are going to multiply and divide, okay? And when we multiply, what we use is distributive property, right? So for example, in this first one I have here, I have 7 times 3 minus 4i. So I am just going to distribute. And there's only one number here that I'm distributing, and that's the negative, okay? A -7. So I have a -7 times 3, which gives me a -21. And then a -7 times a -4i, which gives me a +28i. And that's my answer. So multiplying could be a little easier, okay? When it's just one number outside that parenthesis, okay? So then what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and look at dividing. Now, so I'm gonna write up here. So multiply is distribute. Okay, when there's one number outside of the parenthesis, okay? So you guys can write this down. I'm gonna abbreviate though, okay? So now when we divide, all we're doing, okay, is really simplifying. Okay, we're not actually dividing anything. We're gonna look at the number on the bottom, so the denominator, and see if it can fit into the numerator. So in this first example, we have 4i minus 2, or divided by 2i, okay? And what happens here is that I can cancel some things out, right? So I can divide 2i into both of these things, okay? And what I'm going to get is just 2, okay? So they are both divisible by a 2i. So this would cancel, and 4 divided by 2 becomes 2. Okay? So really all we're doing is simplifying. So in this example, I could see that all of these terms are divisible by 3. So I am going to divide 12 by 3, 15i by 3, and the denominator by 3. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is divide 12 by 3. Okay? And 12 divided by 3 is 4. Then I'm going to divide that 15i by 3. And what's left is 5i. And then 3 divided by 3, which is 1. And when we are talking about math terms, we don't need this 1. So how the answer would end is 4 plus 5i. Okay? And that is my end answer. Okay, so when we divide, we're really just simplifying as far as we can go. Okay? So now I'm going to look at the next one. I need to see what's my greatest common factor that fits into 3, 6, and 12, right? And I always want to look at the smaller number to see if it fits in there. So if I ask myself, does 3 fit into all of these terms? Does 3 fit into -6? Does 3 fit into 3i? Does 3 fit into 12i? And I would say, yes, it does. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide -6 by 3, and that gets me -2. I am then going to divide a positive 3i by 3, and I am just left with I. And then I'm going to divide 12i by 3, and I am left with 4i. And this would be my final answer because that's in its most simplest form. Okay, so when we are just doing some operations, it's pretty simple. Okay, and now this is where something changes a little bit, okay? So when we are looking at multiplying complex numbers, and here we're gonna look at something different, right? So we have binomials here, right? So when we learned how to multiply binomials, we learned how to FOIL, okay? And when we learned how to FOIL, we were taught something called the box method. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my box method, okay? That's a really bad box. All right, so I'm setting up my box. And we are doing the same exact thing when we are foiling. So you got to go back into your brain a little bit. And remember that this first binomial is going to go on top with its signs. So I have a +2 and a -2i. So that's being split up on the top. Then I'm going to take the second binomial and I'm going to split that up and put it on the bottom with their signs, okay? So then what I need to do is I need to go ahead and multiply. So just like foiling, I'm going to multiply -4 times 6, which gives me a -4 times 2, which gives me a -8. Then I'm going to multiply -4 times -2i, which gives me a +8i. Then I'm going to multiply 7i times 2, which gives me 14i, and that's positive. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply 7i times -2i. And if you remember, I told you guys to remember that that we can think of an I as a variable. So think of it as x. And when we multiplied an x times an x, we got an exponent of 2. So this time, we are just going to get an exponent of 2, but this time it's with an I. Okay, but what is important about today's lesson, this is the most important part about today, is that I squared is equal to -1, okay? Because we want to simplify this down. So I squared is equal to -1. So what I want you to do immediately when you see I squared is cancel it out and put a big slash through it. Okay, so you're going to put a slash through that I squared, and what you're going to do is in parentheses you're going to write a -1 because I squared is equal to -1. Okay? Then what you can do is remember that we are just going to write this down in a Z, right? Because we learned that it's a Z box, okay? So watch, my first step is to write down -8, then I'm adding 8i, then I'm adding 14i, and here is my tricky part. So this is where we need to pay attention a little bit, okay? We have a -14 times a -1 now because we removed our I squared, right? And it became -1. So 14 times -1 becomes a +14. Okay? So that I squared turning into -1 is very important because it's going to change the signs. Okay? And then what you can do from there is just combine like terms. And 14 minus 8 or -8 plus 14 would become 6. And then 14i plus 8i becomes 22i. And this is your final answer. Okay, so this is how you would complete something like this. Okay, Now the next one looks a little bit different. So this one looks a bit different because now I'm not going to use the box method because I only see one term on the outside here, okay? So what I'm going to do is I am just gonna distribute because that makes this a little bit easier, okay? So now I see negative 5i times negative 3. So a negative times a negative gives me a positive 15i. Then I'm going to distribute the negative 5i to the 12i, the positive 12i, okay? And now here we have two i's, right? So something's going to happen, okay? But first, I'm going to multiply negative 5i times 12i, which immediately gives me a negative 60, right? But I am multiplying two i's. So remember, just like variables, if I have I times I, it gives me I squared. Okay? But I squared is equal to negative 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cancel out that I squared and put a negative 1 there. Okay? So now I have 15i, and what I need to do now is multiply negative 60 times negative 1, which gives me a positive 60, and that would be my end answer. Okay? So we really just need to remember to cancel out that I squared and make it a negative 1. All right? So on to the next one. Now we can go back to the box method because we have a binomial on each of these. We have two numbers here and two numbers here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw the box. Okay? And remember, the top, the first number, the first binomial, so the first set of parentheses goes on the top. So that's going to be a plus 3 and a plus 5i. And then the second one goes on the side. So I have a plus 3 and a negative 5i. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and multiply. So I'm first going to multiply this first box. And 3 times 3, I know, is 9. Then I'm going to multiply 3 times 5i, which gives me a positive 15i. Then I'm going to multiply negative 5i times 3, which gives me a negative 15i. And the last thing I need to do is multiply negative 5i times a positive 5i, which gives me a negative 25i squared, right? Because I times I is I squared. Okay? So now while we're in the box, before we do our z, I see an I squared, so I immediately want to cross it out and write in a negative 1. Okay, because I want to replace I squared with negative 1. And then I can go ahead and draw my z. Okay, and that's the order I'm going to write this in. So I have 9 plus 15i minus 15i. And then remember, you have a negative 25 times a negative 1 to give me a positive 25. Okay? And then what we could do is we can combine like terms. So 9 plus 25 is 34. And then 15 minus 15 is 0, right? So they cancel out. And my end answer becomes 34. Okay? So this is how we would complete something like this. All right? So on to the next. Okay? And then 1 through 4 on a separate page. All right, so you're going to complete this on Cami or on a piece of paper and then send it over to me, okay? So remember, just last thing before you go, addition. You are dropping out of the parentheses and combine, okay? Subtraction. You are flipping the signs of second parenthesis, right? Then combining. And for multiplication, depending on how it looks, you can either, you're going to either distribute or FOIL, which we know is called the box method. Okay? So if you need any help, please email me, all right? this I feel like is kind of pretty simple, so, but still, if you need help, let me know, and I am more than happy to help you. Okay, have a great night. You're gonna have a bunch of examples, okay? So you have 5 through 10 here, 9 through 15,